my name is Dennis Van Engelstorp and I'm with the Bee Informed Partnership, and this series of videos or vlogs are going to be about the management survey results for 2011-2012. And those results are published. They're published by our collaborator at Penn State Hershey Medical School, PhD candidate Angela Spleen led that effort. And basically, we summarized the winter loss of 2011-2012. This season of loss was the lowest season of loss that we recorded since we started winter loss survey 6 years ago. And so what you can see from this graph is in the maroon color is the summer loss, and that was about 10%. It's important to note that that 10% has been consistent or pretty consistent throughout every year that we've done this survey. So about a 10% loss is typical. What was lower than in previous years was the loss we experienced last winter, which was at 25%. So a 25% loss and a 10% loss over the summer gave us an annual loss of just over 30%. Now, one thing that you'll point out is say, well, 10 and 25 don't add up to 30. And that's because in this particular survey, not everyone answered all the questions. And so what we're doing is we're only representing losses by those who answered specific questions that allowed us to calculate winter or summer losses. What we want to do is we basically, most of our results are going to be presented as monofactorial. We only look at did something work or did not something work, and we don't break it down into subgroups. The one exception to that is regional differences. And we break the data down by two different regions. The first is by north and southern states. And so you can see in the light blue here, those are what we consider northern states for this analysis, and in the purple is what we consider southern states. What you can see, of course, is that in northern states, beekeepers who manage bees in northern states lost more colonies than those who manage bees in southern states. And this is pretty consistent throughout the years of this study. We also break down the colonies or population into subregions in some cases. And what you can see here is the different subregions. We have the West, we have the South, we have the Midwest, the Southeast, and the Northeast. What's interesting here is you can see that it was Western states that experienced the highest rate of loss, well over 30%. It was the higher rate than any of the other subregions. This is very different than last year's winter loss survey for 2010-2011, where it was the Northeast which experienced the highest levels of loss. And so again, this points out to the fact that loss is not equal across the country. It seems to hit different parts of the country at different levels. One of the things we do is break down beekeepers by operational size. And of course, this is very important because of what a beekeeper who manages more than 500 colonies does is probably very different than a beekeeper who keeps a couple colonies in his backyard. And so we break down our population by these factors. We're hoping in future years, when we have more than 300 respondents for each of these groups, to break down our management survey by operational size. But right now, we don't have enough data for the commercial beekeepers to parse them out. What you can see in this is that backyard beekeepers were by far and large the biggest proportion of our respondents pool. And that makes sense because most beekeepers in this country keep 50 or fewer colonies. However, that group of beekeepers owns only 5% of the colonies in the country. So 95% of the beekeepers own 5% of the colonies. However, the commercial group, those who manage over 500 colonies, they manage 90% of the colonies. So 95% of the beekeepers own 5% of the bee colonies, where 5% of the beekeepers own 90% of the colonies. And so these two groups are very distinctive. And you can also see that they lost different numbers of colonies. Backyard beekeepers lost significantly more colonies than large commercial beekeepers. Another way of looking at this population is dividing those people who moved colonies across state lines at least once a year and those who didn't. We consider those who didn't move colonies across state lines stationary versus migratory who moved colonies across state lines. And you can see that non-migratory beekeepers lost significantly more colonies than those who moved bees across state lines. And this is important because a lot of people say that a lot of the losses occurring in this country occur because of migratory stress. And while indeed there may be such thing as migratory stress, there are certainly ways of overcoming that migratory stress if it's true because migratory beekeepers consistently lose fewer colonies than people who don't move their colonies. Losses of beekeepers by percent income derived from beekeeping. You can see that those who made 91 or more percentage of their annual income from beekeeping derived products lost significantly fewer colonies than everything else. Basically, if you're making a living keeping bees, you're a good beekeeper and you're better at keeping your bees alive than any of the other groups. Reason for keeping bees. There's lots of reasons for keeping bees, and you'll see some just do it for enjoyment. Those beekeepers tended to lose more colonies than other groups. Certainly, the group that lost the fewest colonies were those who kept bees primarily to produce nukes. And we'll get back to this in the later results, where it seems that there is something intrinsic about making nukes that makes that helps keep colonies healthy and reduce colony losses. So just before we talk about all the different management techniques, I think it's good to remember A.I. Root, who of course was over 100 years ago, and he made this quote: "I think that it's safest to base our assumption that the culture of bees in some respects is hazardous to business, even among the most thoughtful and careful." And that's a really good quote, that keeping bees is as much an art as it is a science. And there's a lot of complexity and there's a lot of nuance in it. And so while we're presenting big results showing differences between what management practices work and don't work, there's a lot of subtlety to that. And so you as a beekeeper have to make really informed decisions about what practices are best for you that fit your management style better than others. The information is for educational purposes only. References to commercial products or trade names do not imply endorsement by the Bee Informed Partnership or its members. The results presented here are the summary of the population who responded. This sample may not be representative of the beekeeping population at large. These results simply highlight differences in the sample population. The results cannot be considered conclusive, causative, protective, or attest to product efficacy or lack of efficacy.